Hi, it's Von Hertzog. I'd like to welcome you back to the Social Club, my analog digital hybrid studio. Today, I'd like to talk to you about my secret sauce. I'm going to give you my parallel compression settings. So if you want to follow my lead, you can set your session up the exact same way. I'll have templates down below, link in the description. Click it, you can download these templates, okay? Because I'm going to set you up and teach you about parallel compression. I'm going to teach you the East Coast style for how we mix records out here, all right? Some people call it New York compression. I call it East Coast compression because East Coast is a lot bigger than just New York, right? I'm from Philly. Represent. So come along for the ride. Pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee, maybe a glass of whiskey, whatever you're into. Let's get into it. All right, so welcome back to the Social Club. I'm Von Hertzog, and today we are talking about parallel compression. Why do I use it? How do I use it? And what are the results that it ends up giving me? We're going to cover that all today, so strap in. Parallel compression can make your mix feel big and glued together without losing the dynamics of your mix. You're not flattening it within an inch of its life. You're giving it dynamics and room to breathe because you're not just slapping one compressor over your mix and having it do all the work. That's not the approach we're going for here. Here, we're going to use two different compressors in tandem. They're going to be feeding the same master bus, but they're going to have different settings and different characteristics, which is why we're using them. So what I'm going to show you works outside the box in my hybrid setup. It also works inside the box. If you do all your work inside a DAW, you don't have to leave the DAW at all to use this technique. The technique that I'm talking about today, parallel compression, it's pretty easy. In concept, you're taking the mix, you're feeding it into a bus, you're feeding it into another bus, and then you're blending those two buses back into the main master bus to see how much compression you want to dial in. How much of the more dynamic compressor are you letting through? How much of the more saturated compressor are you letting through? And when you feather them together and you bring them back in and you fold the B bus back into the A bus to print back in, what are the characteristics you're getting? I'm going to get into that. I'm going to tell you why I picked these different compressors for these different tasks. I am sending all of my mix channels out from the Antelope Orion 32 Plus into the Solid State Logic Sigma. The Sigma is my remote mixing engine. It's a rack unit, but it's the same mix engine that you find in their Duality and AWS consoles, which go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So while I'm not getting the individual channel strips that you would on those boards, I am getting the mix engine, which I would argue is the more important part of it all. Summing things together in analog gives it this big, giant, wider than digital, deeper than digital kind of sound. And that's why I lean on it so heavily here at the Social Club. First of all, I have an Antelope Orion 32 Plus. That gives me 32 analog channels that pairs perfectly to the SSL Sigma. I take the 32 outs from the Orion, plug them to the 32 inputs of the Sigma, and then I run those 32 outputs of the Sigma back to the 32 inputs of the Orion. So I can print all my stems in their mixed position when I'm done with a session, which is great because when I'm done with a song, I can hand off printed mixed stems to the artist, which they can use when they perform live if they need backing tracks. Once I have all 16 stereo channels routed into the Sigma from the Orion, then inside the Sigma, I have a whole plethora of controls. I can decide which channel is mono versus which is stereo. I can decide to send it to the A bus, the B bus, or both. Once I have my A bus and my B bus, I can decide whether I want to use the inserts on the A bus and the B bus. I can decide if I want to fold the B bus back into the A bus so that both buses are printing back into the converter. Ultimately, I'm just trying to get the best quality audio I can, and this is the best system I have found for the amount of money that I put out. And I use that type of parallel compression to dial in the final sound of the record. Here's how I do it. Everything goes to the B bus and gets hit by the warm VCA bus compressor. It's just like the SSL bus compressor. I like it. I don't like the transformers on it. I never engage them. It imparts some really weird high frequency stuff that I do not like. And so I never use the transformers on the warm, but it is a good sounding compressor otherwise. And that's what I use on my B bus. On the A bus, I have the Chameleon Labs 7721 VCA comp. I originally had their first model of this. The 7721 is a big upgrade. It's a big upgrade. Their own hand-wound transformers that they created. I had some issues with the VU meter on it, but aside from that, this unit sounds amazing. Really great unit. And I'm only ever really using 50% of it because I keep that wet-dry knob at high noon because I want to let some of that dry signal bleed in. You know, the individual channels are already compressed and limited a bit inside the DAW. So by the time they're getting there, you don't have to keep smashing them. And recently I've gone to a outboard vocal chain where I'm using a Lintec EQ and a Lin 76 compressor. And I decide based on the song if I want to put the Lintec compressor before or after the compressor. I can do that in my patch bay and it makes life easier. But I'm processing the main dry vocals through that. And once everything is fully summed and beautiful sounding out of the Sigma, I then take those A-bus outputs and I put them directly into the Dangerous Convert 80+. And that is the final analog master print. Because what I'm really doing here is I'm mixing the song that goes through and gets sent to the A and B bus compressors. So that's happening to some degree in the box or in the Sigma plugin. I am setting those levels. And so since everything's going to the A bus and everything's going to the B bus, I have apples to compare, right? I'm comparing the exact same thing on both. If I set both of their faders to the same gain, then I know that I'm literally comparing apples to apples, A bus to B bus. And so this allows me to kind of switch back and forth and get an idea for how much saturation is being added to the B bus. You know, how many dynamics am I letting through on the A bus? And when I blend them together and push them through the master fader, is it blending right? Do I need a little bit more saturation? Do I need a little bit more dynamics? I'll show you how I do all that stuff a little bit later here. In analog, on my A bus, I am using the Chameleon Labs 7721. It's a VCA style compressor, but they hand wound their own transformers for this thing, for the input and the output stage. So part of this decision for me is deciding how to gain stage, how hard I hit that compressor. There's a little over indicator on the input and the output stages, so you can tell when you're overdriving those transformers. I sometimes tickle the light, but I don't like that light turning red on the A-bus compressor. When that starts happening, I can hear it. I hear the saturation and the extra, you know, like distortion, which is what saturation is. And I can hear it affecting it in a way that I'm not a fan of. So I make sure that when I'm hitting that 7721, that I'm just tickling that light a little bit at the very heavy parts of the song. For the B bus, I'm using the Warm bus compressor, their VCA bus compressor. This is a model of the SSL bus compressor. It's Warm Audio's take on the SSL bus compressor. And it sounds damn near identical. You know, they're using the same VCAs that SSL uses from the same company. And so by doing so, I treat it the same way I'd treat an SSL. 100% of the saturation is on it. There's no wet dry knob on it, right? And I'm just hammering everything through to that for the extra, you know, I would say, I'm hitting the B bus at like 4 to 6 decibels of compression. I really want it to saturate in and then be able to fold that back into the A. Because on the A bus, I'm putting that saturation knob at about 40 to 50, 55%, somewhere in that range. Because if I feel that not enough dynamics are poking out, I'll let a little bit more of that dry signal through, the uncompressed signal, so that I regain some of those dynamics. If I find that it's overly dynamic, I might take that wet dry knob and put it back up to about 50%, so less of the dries poking through. And then, after I have my A bus and my B bus compressed, I fold them back in. The B bus folds back into the A bus nicely through the Sigma app, and the outputs of the A then have the A and B blended together at whatever rate I set the faders at. By doing this, I can easily tell when I'm working on a mix exactly how much saturation it needs. And this is how I can mix and master at the same time. I decide how hard I'm pushing the Sigma into the Dangerous Convert 80+. The Dangerous Convert 80+ is handling my analog to digital conversion. Right now, I have everything synced to the SSL Alpha 8 master clock. I have been using that as my master clock for the last few weeks, and I've gotten used to it. I feel like there's more detail in the SSL clock, but not like in the Antelope way, where there's detail, but it sounds more digital and sterile and brittle. It doesn't sound as warm and natural as the Dangerous clock. The SSL is somewhere between the two, but it's definitely closer to the Dangerous clock, which is why I'm leaning on it full time now as my master clock here at the Social Club. So let me give you what the settings are now for the individual compressors, so you know what my attack time is, what my ratio is, what my release time is. I'm going to tell you all of it. So you can recreate it in the box with my templates that I've given you, or if you have similar gear or you have your own analog gear that you want to use, these settings are somewhat universal. But again, every compressor has its own quirks and idiosyncrasies. So make sure that it sounds right when, you're pushing your music through. You're the ultimate judge. Your ears are still doing all the hard work here. So the A bus for me is my punch with poise. I keep the Chameleon Labs at a 2-to-1 ratio. That way it's not applying too much compression. It's not overly squashing it. Plus, I'm still keeping the wet dry knob on the Chameleon Labs at about 40 to 50%. So I'm really not applying too much compression of this. We're talking like maybe 2 to 4 decibels of compression at the most on this compressor, because I want those natural dynamics to kind of come through, right? I don't want to squish them all out of life. I don't want it to look like a 2x4 the whole way across. The attack time, I keep it at around 10 milliseconds. That is typically my target for the Chameleon Labs. Now I can go down as low as 5 or even 1 millisecond, and I can push it all the way up to 30 if I feel like it. But the majority of the time, the way I like to treat the A bus, I'm keeping it at around 10 milliseconds. For the release, 0.3 seconds. So 0.3 on the release, that avoids any potential chatter or that kind of breakup you can get when your release is too fast. You don't want your release time too fast on a compressor. It can start to sound artificial and you'll notice. So that 300 millisecond or 0.3 second release really does help minimize the chatter and just let the music shine. So on the A bus, I like to have the gain reduction only at about, 1 to 2 decibels, 3 to 4 at the hard parts. Because again, I'm trying to keep this compressor a little lighter. I want more of those dynamics to shine through. That's important for what we're doing here so that they blend nicely in parallel. And what I'm doing on both of these compressors is I'm engaging the sidechain high pass filter. That avoids the compressors from triggering and pumping from the kick and bass notes, because sometimes that can distort how often the threshold trigger is reached. So since the kick and the bass aren't really pumping the compressor, 1 to 4 decibels is that range that we're looking for. Maybe 4 to 5 decibels at the very heavy parts. That's the most we want to go. We're trying to keep it lighter here. And that mix knob helps us keep it light too. Now let's talk about the B bus, the warm VCA bus compressor. Here I'm going for a harder 4-to-1 ratio. I'm squishing it a little bit more, but that's what I want out of this compressor, because this is going to give me my saturation, my depth. It's the solid part that's going to sit in the mix, like your foundation, your bedrock. Now for the warm compressor, I like to go with Dr. Dre's SSL bus compressor settings. He has settings that he always sets on the SSL bus compressor in his board, and he leaves it there. That's what I'm doing with the warm VCA. 30 millisecond attack, 0.1 second release. 4-to-1 ratio. Sidechain is on again, and we're running 100% wet on this one. The sidechain on this is set to 105. The sidechain on the A bus is set to 130. So they're slightly different because they have different options for where you can filter things out at. And I have found A bus 130, B bus 105. But you can adjust to taste. And so what the B bus is doing is it's giving me that finished sound, that solid finished sound of a record that, stays present even at low volumes. That's what the B bus is doing for me here. It's what helps the record feel finished. It's that analog glue everyone's always talking about. The more that you try this technique, the more that you build it into your arsenal and you use it more frequently, the more natural it's going to become. When you first get started on it, you might want to use this as like your guardrails, okay? Your A bus is really trying to be that lighter bit that is giving you your front to back dynamics and isn't feeling as saturated and compressed as your B bus. So with that 40 to 50% wetness, I'll typically set the drums and the vocal levels to get that poking through at the right amount. We want those vocals and drums to feel a bit forward. If they start feeling clamped, I'll adjust the ratio to let a little bit more of the dry signal through so that they don't feel as compressed. And one of the tricks I've mentioned before in some of my Patreon articles is mixing at a low volume level, you know, set the volume to around conversation level. So maybe like 60 to 70 decibels, you know, somewhere in there, 60, 70 decibels. Set the mix level to there and listen. And are you hearing that there's enough heft there? You know, you don't want things to disappear when you turn the volume down. Your mix should hold up when the volume's low. And more importantly, it should hold up when you crank it. Because if you crank a mix and things start to fall out of place, they weren't in the right place in the first place. You got to go back, get them at their right level. So when you crank everything, it doesn't just fall apart like trying to hold soup in your hands. And just for taming that low end, if the low end is starting to build up a little bit too much, you're starting to get a little bit too much sub rumble down there, down at the bottom, what I'll do is I'll use a dangerous backs EQ. Because regardless of the EQ itself, I like the high pass and low pass filters that the backs EQ has. And I will use that low pass at like 24 or 31 or even 43, I think, are the different indented levels that you can go to with the backs. I will do that before it gets to the compressor. So I will high pass filter out some of that super low end rumble before it gets to the compressor. So it's not even, you know, even when the side chains engaged in the compressor, you still don't want that low end coming up because it still gets processed and it can end up getting like murky and muddying up your song. So be careful of that. You know, when you start folding your B bus back in, if you notice that your vocals and your snare are starting to get a little murky or a little woolly and you're noticing that they're kind of disappearing, you can pull B back a little bit, you know, let a little bit more of that A pop through where you get those transients a little sharper. And don't forget to check at quiet levels, because if your kick and your bass and your vocals disappear at a low level, then they weren't right. They weren't right to start with, and you have to go back and address that. Now let's talk about inside the box, because I know a lot of you out there don't have an analog setup, and you definitely don't have my analog setup. So does this translate to in the box? Yeah, it translates to in the box. You can do it. You totally can do it. So for in the box, here's how I like to do it. I have two buses, and those buses are feeding the master channel, right? Those are going to be my A bus and my B bus in the box. All right, as you can see, I have my session pulled up here. This is the template, the parallel processing template that I'm including, link down in the description. So go and grab this if you have Cubase Nuendo, or if you have Logic or Pro Tools. There's going to be individual ones for all three. So if you have them, you're in luck. Now, let's get down to what I did here. I took all of these channels, these mix channels, and I sent them all to these two buses that I have here, and I'll show you how I did it. First, I sent them all to the A bus, so they're all going here. But then to also get them to the B bus, I'm using the sends to send all the channels post-fader to the B bus. So everything's going to A and B at the same level. Now let's take a look at the plugins that I'm using as my compressors for in the box. I'm using a FabFilter Pro C2 in place of the Chameleon Lab 7721. Ton of options on this thing, super versatile, really, really love this compressor. Settings are going to be the same, thresholds dialed in to give us about -2 to at the most -4 decibels of compression, ratio at 2:1, attack at 10 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds on release. Wet dries dialed in, side chain set to 130. So that's our A bus. To get to our B bus, threshold set up for 4 to 6 decibels of compression, makeup gain to make it even, 30 millisecond attack, 0.1 second release, 4:1 ratio, and the sidechain filter at 105 to match the warm. 100% wet on this one. And on both of these, we will be utilizing oversampling to take advantage of the higher sample rate when you're using non-linear plugins. So with these two compressors, we can push the music through to these and then use these faders to feed the master bus. Both of these, mix A and B, are going to the stereo out, which is over here. So let's play it. You can see, you can solo one, solo the other. But you can see -2.2 compression here, hitting between 4 and 6. And if I want more saturation, push this one up. If I want a little bit more dynamics, let this one through. It's not complicated, guys. And I have a brick wall here just to make sure nothing gets through. But, you know, we don't want anything to clip just in case. So that's just there to catch any overs. But you want to keep these things low enough that you're targeting, you know, a nice mix range to hand off to the mastering engineer. Okay, so now let's talk about potential pitfalls. Let's say that you try this out and you start running into problems, right? And you go, this isn't working the way I thought it would. Well, let's try and troubleshoot it now, okay? Let's say that you're doing this, but you realize that the punch is missing from your record now, right? Hey, where'd the punch go? Well, let's figure that out. First thing I do is I check the attack on the A bus comp. Where is it? Should be closer to 10. Put it at around 10. And if that didn't do the trick, take the wet dry knob and turn it down to 40. See if that does the trick. Those should help bring your punch back. Because when you put the wet dry knob down on the A bus, you're letting more of those transients through. Let's say that it's not the punch, but now your mix is getting cloudy. We don't want a cloudy mix, right? Here's what you're going to do. Take your B bus, go in, and get an EQ. I like to use the Q3, the Fab Filter Pro Q3. It's awesome, very transparent. But what I'll do is I'll take that Pro Q3 and I'll add a little cut between 200 and 400 hertz. Because that's where your mud and your haze can start to build up. So what you want to do is just on the B bus where we're really saturating it down, pull a little bit of that out. You might realize your mix opens up because it might. It could, depending, you know, like every session's different. I don't know where you are in your particular part of your particular session. But if you run into this issue where you're starting to notice that it's starting to cloud up, get a little boomy or muddy, pull that down there between 2 and 400. You know, move the EQ point around, get to the point that works just right, and use it. Maybe you have the opposite effect. Maybe it's a little too edgy up top, a little too much at the, 3 to 5K region is getting through, and it's making everything a little too bright. That usually happens when I'm over favoring A. And so what I'll do is I'll just pull A back down a little bit, maybe a half decibel, maybe 1 decibel, because sometimes those transients come through a little too much and you got to rein them back in. And another thing I can do is on the A bus, I will check the release time where it's the 0.3 seconds there. I might go up to half a second, to 0.5 seconds. Sometimes that does the trick as well. It depends on the material you're working on, slower music, faster music. You got to stay in the pocket with your compressors, right? So you're going to need to adjust your attack and release times to meet your material. I'm starting with these as the generic attack and release times, and this is typically what I can keep on the bus for almost anything. But you know how it is when you're in there in a mix, every now and then you'll get one of those trouble sessions where things are just not working out the way that you want them to. And make your adjustments as needed. Always trust your ears. You know what I'm saying? Like, trust your ears. When you're hearing something, you're like, that's not right. It's probably not right. Make your adjustments. And if you want to know what your music would sound like running through all of this beautiful analog gear, hit me up. Check out my website, thesocialclub.studio. Check out the testimonials. Check out some of the music I've mixed and mastered. And contact me. Let me know how I can help you get your music sounding better than it's ever sounded before. So hit me up, Von Hertzog at The Social Club. I'm right here. I'm mixing in analog and digital. I'm using my hybrid approach, and I'm getting better sound results than I've ever gotten before. Don't be late to the party. Come join The Social Club. If you're an artist who is working on an album, I know how expensive it can be when your music's finally finished at the end, right? You finally worked on this album, you have 10 songs, 12 songs, but now you have to pay to get them all mixed and mastered because you're not an engineer, you're a musician. Well, hit me up. And if you'd like to kind of squirrel some money away for that album so you're not doing a giant bill at the end, join my Patreon. Every dollar you spend on Patreon gets kicked back to you for services here. So it only makes sense. It's worth doing. So check it out. Thank you for coming along and watching. Thank you for helping me grow this channel. I'm getting close to 6,000 subs, which, a year ago I was at 3,000. So to have almost doubled that in a year feels awesome. I hope I can keep this momentum rolling. I know a lot of you out there are waiting for my King R04Y MKIII floor standards video. It is coming. It'll be out by the end of October. I'm trying to get every aspect of it filmed. We're taking it up a whole other notch on this one. So this video is going to be awesome, but I'm not releasing it until it's ready. So that's why it's taking a little more time than usual, but keep an eye out for that. I can't wait. If you want to support the channel, drop a like and subscribe. And if you really want to support the channel, head on over to my Patreon, where I drop weekly articles. You know, we can chat. Anyone can reach out to me, talk to me about anything you want to talk about. And I'm pretty receptive. So come on, join my Patreon. You know, I think I'm going to put a tier in for YouTube people who just want to throw a couple bucks at the channel a month because they like it and want to support it. So keep your eyes peeled, okay? Patreon.com/socialclubsound. And of course, thank you to all my Patreon subscribers. And I want you to go over and check out the Patreon and maybe sign up. Initially, when I launched the Patreon channel, I wasn't thinking of my YouTube channel. I was thinking of it being for artists that are looking to have services performed here at the Social Club. Somebody wants mixing or mastering or co-production or whatever it is they might need. My idea was 100% of the money that you put into that Patreon due will come back to you for services here. So if you're an artist that's looking to get music finished in the future, you might not want to get hit with that big bill at the end. It's not too big, don't get me wrong, I'm not insanely expensive. However, everybody knows you'd rather pay a fraction than pay the whole lump sum, right? Doesn't matter what amount of money it is, you'd always pay less. So by breaking it into monthly bits, your cash flow gets better because you're not paying all this out at once. And it makes my cash flow better because I know that I have a bank of money to rely on every month, and I perform the services as needed. So the artists that have used it here love it because it tends to be that, you know, they're paying out into the Patreon throughout the year. And then when it comes time to do their music, they're already paid off. They don't even have to put any extra money out because they've already done it. So, you know, think about it. They canceled Jimmy Kimmel. You can go kill your Hulu and Disney Plus subscription now. Dead that shit. Maybe put that money over here. So thanks for coming along with me today. Thanks for listening. I hope you learned something. If you did, give me a like and subscribe. If not, I'm sorry to have taken up your time, but I hope you'll come back and another video I'll have a little bit better luck with being something you're looking for. Don't forget to tell your friends, Social Club. We're awesome over here. We like audio. We like speakers. We like studios. We do it all. So keep that in mind. And until next time, this has been Von Hertzog from the Social Club.